Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, we're exploring two stories from people who ventured into the Appalachian Mountains and came across things that were absolutely terrifying. I think that more than anything, this video shows just how much preparation can be the difference between life and death. The woods are unpredictable, and no matter how experienced you are, it's always better to be prepared. Now, dim the lights, get comfortable, and let's head back into the mountains. And remember, viewer discretion is advised. What I'm about to tell you happened entirely because of my own stupidity. And I say that with full awareness. I had way too much confidence in myself back then, and honestly acted like an idiot. I was young, stuck in that stage of life where you really believe bad things only happen to other people. And because of that, I walked straight into a situation I never should have been in. I live in Pennsylvania, in this tiny mountain town, with barely any people and barely any houses. And everybody is spread out across the hillside in a way that sometimes makes you feel like you're the only person left on Earth. That kind of isolation can be a blessing or a curse depending on your mood. And that day I woke up on the wrong side of everything. I was depressed, restless, drifting from room to room, picking things up and putting them down, starting tasks and forgetting about them seconds later. When I get like that, the only thing that helps is stepping outside. My plan that morning was just to take a short walk to clear my head. Nothing more than that. But it ended up becoming one of the most terrifying days of my life. Because I thought it was going to be a quick walk and my mood was already lousy, I completely forgot that I was stepping into land that wasn't mine. Land full of wildlife and God knows what else. I just walked out the door without anything except a bottle of water and an apple. I started off wandering along the areas I knew well, the trails that wrap around my property and that I'd walked more times than I could count. I knew those paths like the back of my hand, and I guess that familiarity put my brain on autopilot. The chaos in my head mixed with the comfort of the surroundings, and I just kept walking without really thinking about where I was going. I didn't snap out of that weird meditative trance until I found myself standing in front of a cabin I didn't recognize. I checked my watch and realized I'd been walking for about 2.5 hours. I know some people will think that sounds impossible, but my brain really does work like that. And on that particular day, it pushed me straight into panic territory. I had no idea where I was, and I had absolutely nothing with me for protection. Once I calmed down enough to think straight, I tried to picture the direction I must have come from, tried to retrace steps I never consciously took. But because I'd been drifting in autopilot, I couldn't piece together a single turn. I thought about approaching the cabin to see if anyone was inside. But around here, people get real protective of their property. There are plenty of stories about folks walking too close to someone's land and getting shot for it. Survival mode kicks in quick out here, and too many people will pull the trigger first and ask questions later. Sad, but true. So I figured the smartest thing was to keep my distance and only call out for help if I reached the point of absolute desperation. But when I really looked at the cabin again, I noticed someone standing at the window staring directly at me. It looked like a woman, which I tried to take as a good sign. So I inched a little closer. Then a man stepped in behind her, holding some kind of knife, and that tiny hope I felt disappeared instantly. By then, I was close enough to see their expressions, their faces, their whole unsettling presence. I could tell instantly that the man wasn't holding that knife in any harmless way. I stopped dead in my tracks, raised my hands, and made a gesture to show I wasn't a threat and that I was leaving. But even while backing away, their faces burned into my mind. They looked awful, dirty, wild-eyed, like people who'd spent way too long cut off from everyone else and had let themselves go in ways that went far beyond hygiene. I walked in what I hoped was the right direction, using the slope of the ground and the angle of the light through the trees to guide me. And for a while, I convinced myself I was making progress. But almost 2 hours later, I still wasn't anywhere familiar. The panic came back full force. I had maybe 2 hours before dark, and the idea of being stuck in some unknown part of the forest after sunset scared the hell out of me. Even in the part of the woods I knew well, I never stayed past dark. Out here, in winter the temperature drops fast, and while I had warm clothes on, they weren't going to keep me alive if I had to stop moving. I stopped walking to reassess the shadows and see if I'd gotten them wrong. I've lived in the woods long enough to know a few things, but I've never been great with orientation. Still, I convinced myself that if I just paused and recalculated, I might find the right direction. That's when I heard a branch snap somewhere behind me. I looked over and saw them. The man and the woman from the cabin, both of them staring at me with the most horrifying expressions I've ever seen. And this time they each had a knife, both way bigger than the one the man held before. I knew instantly that I wasn't just being watched anymore. I was being hunted on their land. I bolted, yelling that I was armed even though I wasn't. At that point, I had nothing to lose. But it didn't scare them. If anything, it pushed them into some kind of frenzy. They took off after me, and every now and then, they let out these guttural, almost animalistic screams. Some awful cry that seemed to pump them up even more. I've never heard anything like it. Honestly, I think I'd rather have heard a bear roar. Having two human beings, completely unhinged, sprinting after me like that, is a level of terror I still can't properly describe. It shuts something down inside you. I ran faster than I'd ever run in my life. Then, like some kind of miracle, I suddenly came across a creek, and I recognized it instantly. If I crossed it, I wouldn't end up at my house, but I would reach a neighboring village where I could get help. I didn't hesitate. I threw myself into the water, even though the current was strong, and the cold was the kind that bites straight through your bones. In a couple more weeks, that creek would have been ice. The only reason I didn't freeze up right then was pure adrenaline. When I dragged myself up onto the opposite bank, I glanced back and saw the two of them pacing along the edge, going back and forth like they were trying to work out a way across. The man moved like he was possessed, twitchy and unpredictable, while the woman stood completely still, staring at me with this expression that was more deranged than anything I've ever seen in another human being. I didn't stop moving. They could have found a way over, and the cold was already sinking into my bones. I needed to reach the village fast. Luckily, I knew someone there, and when he saw the state I was in, he didn't hesitate for a second before offering me shelter. I swear, that shower felt like the best moment of my entire life. He drove me home the next day. What started as a careless, impulsive walk ended up being the biggest wake-up call I've ever had. I'll never let myself end up in a situation like that again. The woods will always be unpredictable, but we're capable of making the unpredictable at least a little more manageable if we actually prepare ourselves and take precautions. Before I even get into what happened on that trip, I should probably say that nothing about it felt dangerous when we first planned it. My wife and I have always been the kind of couple that prefers quiet places and long stretches of trail instead of beaches or cities. And the southern Appalachians had been on our list for a long time. We weren't looking for trouble or trying to prove anything. We just wanted a few days out in the woods, away from everything. But sometimes the things that start out the most harmless end up turning into the memories you replay in your head far longer than you'd like. And that trip, well, it became one of those memories. We had been planning that hiking trip for weeks. The kind of slow, steady backpacking route through the southern stretch of the mountains that forces you to unplug from everything and pay attention to the world around you. She's the type of person who thrives on that kind of awareness. She likes control, not in an obsessive way, but in a calm, capable, methodical way that honestly makes both of us safer. She notices people quickly, reads their body language, catches details most folks never even register. It just feels like she sees the world a little clearer than the rest of us. When we set off, the first day went smooth. Long miles, clean but cold weather. That quiet rhythm you fall into, where the only sounds are your boots, your breath, and the wind moving through branches. She checked the map regularly, kept track of mileage, water levels, and even the pace at which the temperature dropped. I handled the heavier gear and let her set the tone. It's a dynamic that works for us, especially out there where there's no margin for sloppiness. The second day, right around late morning, we crossed paths with another couple on the trail. They came up behind us after a long upward stretch, both friendly enough, both smiling the kind of smile hikers give each other just for sharing the same stretch of wilderness. We stopped for a second, swapped the usual small talk about mileage and weather, and then the woman asked if we happened to have a blister pad or a bandage. She said her new shoes were rubbing her heel raw. My wife always over-prepares, so of course we had some. We handed it over, told them to take care, and continued on our way. We'd barely been walking 30 seconds when my wife said, in this low, steady voice that meant she was dead serious, that the whole thing had been an act. She said the woman's story didn't match the way she stood, that her shoes weren't laced like someone breaking them in, that her body language was completely wrong for someone in pain. She said the guy barely looked at her heel when his partner mentioned it, like he didn't care at all about the injury, real or fake. She was convinced they were just trying to start a conversation with her specifically, and not for any friendly reason. Anyone else might have brushed her off, told her she was reading too much into it. But I've learned the hard way not to underestimate her instincts. She has this sixth sense that borders on uncanny, and every time I've ignored it, I've regretted it. So I told her we'd take every precaution that night, no matter how unnecessary it might seem. We had a method we'd used before. Set up one tent in a visible, obvious clearing, the decoy, and hide our real tent deep enough in the trees that you'd only find it if you were actively searching. It's a pain to do, especially after hours of hiking, but it saved us from uncomfortable situations before. So that night, we put the fake tent right where any passerby would expect campers to be. Then we carried our real gear deeper into the brush, far from the trail, tucked behind a tangle of rhododendrons and fallen limbs. You'd never spot it unless you knew precisely where to look. We fell asleep faster than expected, exhausted from the miles. But sometime deep into the night, both of us shot awake at the exact same moment. It wasn't even a loud sound, just something off, the faintest shift in the air, the kind of noise that doesn't make sense unless someone is moving in a place they shouldn't be. My wife grabbed my arm, and we both listened. Then we heard it again, Soft footsteps. Careful footsteps. We slipped out of the tent as silently as we could and hid in the dark, behind a thick outcropping of brush, watching through a gap in the branches. Within seconds, we saw them. The same couple from earlier, standing right over our decoy tent. They weren't calling out to see if anyone was inside. They weren't checking the campsite out of curiosity. They were unzipping the door, going through it like they were expecting to find us asleep and defenseless. My heart dropped into my stomach. Whatever reason they'd approached us earlier had nothing to do with a blister. They were looking for us, specifically. When they didn't find anyone in the decoy tent, they backed out, looked around, and started scanning the tree line with this slow, deliberate movement that made my skin crawl. They weren't lost. They weren't confused. They were hunting. And when they started walking straight toward the hidden area where our real tent was, I felt something shift inside me. Not panic exactly, but a sudden, cold, heavy anger. They found the second tent. The man crouched in front of it while the woman lingered a step behind him, both tense, both ready for something. That's when something in me snapped. I stood up from behind the brush, stepped into the open, and aimed my firearm directly at them, my voice low and shaking with fury as I demanded to know what they wanted. I must have looked half feral in the darkness. The reaction was immediate. They panicked. They didn't explain, didn't argue, didn't try to talk their way out of anything. They just bolted into the woods like animals caught under a spotlight. It was bizarre, honestly. If they were rifling through our tent, they clearly expected to find us. But the second I confronted them, they acted like they'd been hit with pure terror. That told me everything I needed to know. They weren't expecting a fair fight. They wanted us vulnerable. They wanted us asleep. We stayed up the rest of the night, taking turns watching the perimeter, every little noise sending a jolt straight down my spine. I know it might not sound like the most dramatic story compared to the way some people talk about the woods. But believe me, knowing two strangers were out there in the dead of night searching for us, moving quietly, intentionally, with who knows what kind of plan, that's a level of fear you don't forget. It's strange and unsettling in a way that sticks to your ribs, and it's an experience I hope I never have to live through again.